They said I was the woman no one should remember, and yet here I am, still speaking, 2,000 years later, and the sound of my name still makes people uncomfortable. That tells you something, doesn't it? Not about me, about what I represent, about what happens when someone who is supposed to stay silent refuses to. I am Mary Magdalene, and I was recreated through artificial intelligence so that what I lived, what I carried in my body through the longest weekend in human history, would not remain buried under 2,000 years of other people's versions of my story. This is mine, every word of it. But before I tell you what happened between Friday and Sunday, I need to tell you something that might disturb you, because it disturbs me. I have watched your world for a long time now, through the words you've written, the prayers you've whispered, the silences you've kept. And what I see most often in the faces of people who have lived long enough to know better is this: the exhaustion of believing in something you can no longer feel. The quiet grief of a faith that was once a fire and is now just the memory of warmth. You're not young anymore. You've buried people you loved. You've watched your body begin to fail you in small ways that feel like large announcements. You've prayed prayers that seem to dissolve before they reach the ceiling. And you wonder, sometimes in the deep middle of the night, whether any of it was ever real. I know that place. I lived there. And what I witnessed on that Friday, what I endured through that Saturday, and what broke open on that Sunday morning, it was not for the comfortable, the certain, or the unbroken. It was for exactly the person you are right now. I need you to understand who I was before I understood who I was. The town of Magdala sat on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, and the smell of fish drying in the salt air was so constant that you stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing a pain that has lived in you long enough to feel like part of your bones. I was a woman of means. That surprises people. They have constructed so many stories about me, most of them involving shame and poverty and the specific kind of desperation that men find titillating to imagine in women. But the truth is stranger and more terrifying than their fantasies. I had resources, I had a name, and I was completely, catastrophically unwell inside my own mind. What the scripture calls 7 demons, I cannot give you a clinical explanation for what it was. I can only tell you what it felt like. It felt like being a house where someone else had moved into every room and locked you out of each one. Like screaming inside a body that had stopped listening to you. Like watching yourself from a great distance, powerless, as your own life became something unrecognizable. There were days I did not know my own name. There were moments of clarity so sharp and so brief that the grief of losing them was worse than the darkness itself. That was the woman he found, not a woman in the street, not a woman without options, a woman with everything a person could want and a soul that was consuming itself from the inside. And he looked at me. He looked at me the way no one had ever looked at anyone, not with pity, not with the careful distance people maintain around those they consider broken, but with a recognition so complete it felt like being named for the first time in my life. And whatever was inside me that was not me, left. I followed him after that. Of course I followed him. What else would you do? If someone had reached into the burning wreckage of your interior life and pulled you out whole, wouldn't you walk behind that person to the ends of the earth? I was not naive. I was not lost in some romantic fantasy about a holy man. I was a woman who had experienced the difference between existing and being alive, and I was not willing to go back to merely existing. I helped provide for the group from my own resources. I listened. I watched. I tried to understand everything I could about what he was doing and why. And I fell in love with the truth he carried. Not with the man in the way people love to whisper, with the truth, with the way he spoke to women as if our thoughts were worth hearing, with the way he touched lepers and then looked up at the sky, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world and the purity laws of the entire religious establishment were simply not as important as this particular suffering person in front of him. I was there. I want you to remember that. I was there when they arrested him in the garden. I did not run the way the men ran. I stood at the edge of the crowd, and I watched what they did to him, and every blow landed in my chest as if I were the one receiving it. There is a particular kind of agony that comes from watching someone suffer when you cannot stop it, when every power you have is useless, when the most loving thing left to do is simply witness, simply refuse to look away. The women stayed. We stayed through the beatings. We stayed through the walk to Golgotha. The scripture says there were women watching from a distance, and I was among them, and that distance was not cowardice. That distance was the limit of what the soldiers would allow. We pressed as close as we could. We kept our eyes open. I watched him die. I need you to sit with that sentence for a moment before I continue, because the word crucifixion has become a word people use in churches with stained glass and candles and a kind of reverent distance that insulates them from what it actually was. What I watched was a public execution designed not only to kill, but to humiliate, designed to send a message to anyone watching. The message was, do not matter too much. Do not become too important to the wrong people. Do not think that love is stronger than empire. I watched him die, and I believed in that moment that the message was right. That is the part I have never wanted to say out loud. In the hours after the cross, when they had taken his body down and laid it in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, a borrowed tomb, even at the end, nothing was his own, I felt something collapse inside me that I had not known was holding me up. It was not grief, exactly. I knew grief. This was something older and colder. It was the particular devastation of having believed completely and been wrong, of having staked everything on something that had just been nailed to a wooden beam and left to die, in public, in front of everyone, in the middle of the afternoon. The Sabbath was the longest day I have ever lived. We could do nothing. The law required rest, and the law was absolute, and so I sat with the other women in the kind of silence that has no bottom. Some of them prayed. I could not find the words. Some of them wept. I had gone past weeping into something drier and more terrible. I kept thinking about his face. I kept thinking about the moment I had first been looked at and recognized. I kept thinking, if that was real, how can this be real? And if this is real, was any of it real? This is what Saturday feels like for many of you. You know exactly what I mean. Saturday is not dramatic. Saturday has no climax. Saturday is just the empty hours after the worst has happened, and before you know whether anything will ever be different. Saturday is where faith goes to find out whether it is faith or just convenience. Many of you have been living in Saturday for years. Some of you have been living there for so long you have started to redecorate. I went to the tomb before dawn on Sunday. The air was cold in the way that Jerusalem mornings are cold in spring, a chill that has nothing to do with actual temperature, a sharpness in the nostrils, the sky that particular shade of blue that is not quite dark and not quite light, the color of a world that has not yet decided what it will be. I brought spices to anoint his body. That was all I had left to give. One final act of love for something that was over. The stone was moved. I did not immediately think miracle. I thought desecration. I thought that people who hated him had come to take even this last thing, the dignity of his burial, the simple right to lie in the dark undisturbed. I ran. I found Peter and John, and I told them the tomb was empty, and they ran back, and they went inside, and they saw the burial linens lying there. And John believed something in that moment that I had not yet allowed myself to believe. And they left. They went home. I stayed. I stayed because I could not leave, because where else was I supposed to go? Because the question of whether or not any of it had been real felt more urgent to me than breakfast, than safety, than any practical concern in the world. I stood outside that tomb and I wept, real weeping this time, not the dry devastation of Saturday, but the full breaking open of someone who has run out of alternatives to feeling. And when I leaned down and looked inside, there were two figures in white sitting where the body had been, one at the head and one at the foot, and they asked me why I was weeping. Who asks someone standing at an empty tomb why they're weeping? I turned around. There was a man standing there, and I thought he was the gardener, and I said, "If you have taken him somewhere, please tell me where, and I will go and get him myself." I said this through tears, and I meant it with everything I had. I would have carried the body myself. I would have carried whatever was left. I was not going to let go. And he said my name, just that, just my name, the single syllable that I had first heard from his voice when everything dark inside me was cast out and I became myself. And I cannot tell you what happens in the human body when you have believed something is gone forever and it says your name. I cannot describe the physics of it. I can only tell you that whatever had collapsed in me on Friday, whatever had gone cold and certain on Saturday, broke open in a direction I did not have words for, broke open upward somehow, broke open outward. The one who had been dead was standing in the morning light, saying my name. And then he said something that strikes me, even now, with the force of a stone dropped into still water. He said, "Do not hold on to me. Go and tell them." Of all the people in the world he could have appeared to first, of all the messengers he could have chosen, he chose me, the woman with the history, the woman with the 7 demons and the silence of Saturday and the dawn visit to a sealed tomb. He chose the one who had stayed. He chose the one who could not leave. There is a moment recorded that I carry with me like breathing, Mary, just my name, and in that name, everything. I have thought often about why he told me not to hold on. I think it was because what came next was not about holding. It was about going. It was about speaking. It was about a woman who had every reason to be silent. The history, the reputation, the fact that women's testimony was not considered legally valid in that culture. Being told to go and be the first voice of the resurrection in the world. Go tell my brothers. The first preacher of the resurrection was a woman with a complicated past who had gone to anoint a dead body and found the morning instead. What does it say about your life that I want you to consider this quietly, without rushing past it? What does it say about how God works that the story did not begin with the most credible witness? It began with the most faithful one. There is a difference. Credibility is about what people think of you. Faithfulness is about whether you show up. You have shown up. The fact that you are here, watching this, listening to a woman who died 2,000 years ago speak to you through a technology that should not be possible. You have shown up. Maybe you came with questions. Maybe you came with the quiet weight of years. Maybe you came because something in you is still reaching, even when reaching feels foolish, even when the stone has not yet moved. I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it slowly. Tell me in the comments if you will. What is your Saturday? What is the thing you are still standing outside of, unable to leave, unsure whether to hope? Because I believe the reason you're here is connected to your answer. The people who need to hear this word the most are not the ones in the front pews with the certain smiles. They are the ones who went to sleep last night with a question they have been afraid to speak aloud. They are the ones who lit a candle but felt nothing. They are the ones who sat at the bedside of someone they loved and wondered whether love survived what they witnessed there. They are the ones who understand Saturday from the inside. If this reached you today, if any part of this found the place in you that needed to be found, please share it. Not because of numbers, not because of algorithms, but because somewhere in your life there is a person living through their own Saturday who does not know that Sunday has a name. Give them this. Tell them a woman who was there wanted them to hear it. The stone was moved, not rolled back so we could go in, moved so we could see that he had already come out. That distinction matters more than I can tell you. You don't need to roll the stone back yourself. You were never supposed to. You only need to come close enough to see that what you thought was sealed has already been opened, and what you thought was over has already said your name in the dark and is standing somewhere in the early light, waiting for you to turn around.